Doing a typical hilltop saw shop modification on this supposedly late model 555. At least it's later than 2016, right? Well, you'd think you'd be able to know when that saw was built by looking at the tag. There is no tag. These are a typical set of cases for a 562 stock saw, right? And the first characteristic you see is stuffers in the crank. That's a full circle inside there. We have those plastic stuffers taking up crank case volume, right? And the second thing you see is a tag. That tag tells you that this is a case that was on a stock saw as it was manufactured by the Husqvarna factory. If that tag is missing, that's not there, it's usually one of two things, possibly three. The first one is the saw has a set of cases that were not with the saw when it left the factory first time out, otherwise replacement cases, be it a short block or case half or something like that, which tells you that the bottom of the saw has been worked on. Now there's another reason, and that is if a saw was taken in because of warranty and the customer was given a different saw, the saw that was taken in by the dealer should at that point be destroyed. That's the plan. And one of the things that happens is they pull that tag off so that the saw can't be sold, you know, as a stock saw. It's supposed to be warranted and taken off the marketplace. That's the whole idea. Husqvarna is not giving saws away. So here's one right here. It's a little different. First thing you're going to notice is there is no stuffers in that crank. I don't know if the camera will show it, but those plastic stuffers are not there. You can look right in there and see the bearing. And that tells you that this is a 555, not a 562. Second thing is the tag has in fact been removed. Those rivets are there. The tag has been removed. And that should not be. Don't know why, don't know the history, don't want to know. But it's coming to my shop to be tweaked on, and I think I'll do that. But I'm going to note on video that this saw came in as a 555 with a removed tag. I don't really see anything wrong with the bottom end, obviously, so I don't know why it could have been a warranty saw. And the other anomaly on this saw is it has an EL46 carburetor, which was usually the ones that were least desirable for 562, and a lot of dealers would pull them off and, you know, put on the EL48s when they came out. I did a lot of that for a dealer myself. So this is a saw that has a couple of little I don't know its history. Like I said, I'm not going to ask. But if I was buying a saw, and if you wanted me to buy one of these 562s or 555s, I'd either want to see the cases with no tag and no rivets, which means it was probably a short block, or with a tag. So having the tag pulled off like that, obviously pulled off, the rivets are still there. The tag is not. That would be a flag. I probably wouldn't buy the saw myself. Now, like I said, I don't know what the story is on this one. It's none of my darn business. My job is not to speculate on that. My job is to make it run good. That brings up another thing. Here's a difference between the 562 and the 555 cylinder. This is a beat up 562, so I'm going to pirate some parts off of it. But the biggest difference that really matters is look at the cap on the transfer port versus the one in the 555. It's both deeper, has more depth this way, but it also starts a little further down. So if you look really close, that distance from here to the bottom is greater than the distance from here to the bottom on the 562 versus the 555. Then the other thing is the distance from the sealing surface to the end here is quite a bit different. So that cap on the 562 is actually quite a bit different than a 555. Now what I'm going to do on this 555 modification, what I'm going to do is really twofold. One is, since that 555 has a lot more case volume than a 562, I think I'm going to add a little duration to the intake side. And I'm going to move this set of caps from an old 562 cylinder over to the 555 cylinder. And that should help it pick up some RPMs. If that was a standard carburetor, I probably wouldn't do that. But seeing as that's a 562 carburetor, therefore it has a 562 chip, I do believe it's going to let it rev a little more. So, it's kind of a dilemma. I may have to put a 562 ignition on top of that. This 555 is going to end up with 562 transfer caps, which pass more volume. And of course I'm going to do the standard modifications I do to cut that skirt down to try to get the flow into the lower transfers a little bit easier. And plus I have to cut about 10 thousandths off this flange so it doesn't interfere with the case. That, my friends, is going to be the essence of the modification. Oh, yeah. It'll pop up. So between, another thing. Keep forgetting. In order to increase the compression, what I'm going to do is, instead of putting in the stock gasket, which is a little bit over 30 thousandths, I've cut a gasket out of this material, which is only 10 thousandths. So I'm going to effectively drop that cylinder 20 thousandths and take away more combustion chamber volume with this little pop-up, and that should increase the compression somewhere around 20 pounds is my guess. 20-25 pounds. At least that's what I'm shooting for. If you remember, we did this and tested compression on this in stock configuration. It came out to be about 150. I'm shooting for 175, 180 by dropping the cylinder 20 thousandths and putting in this pop-up piston. That, along with larger transfers, some very minor modifications to the port timing, and modifications to the lower transfers, is the essence of the build. Now, mufflers. We're going to mod the muffler on this one as well. And my modification on these, I have a couple I'm going to do simultaneously, really is as much about getting heat out of the saw as it is about power. They tend to make a little more power and they make a little more noise. The essence of my muffler mod on these is really about heat. The build is about adding more meat in the lower part of its working power band. That's what the compression is going to do. And oh yeah, with the larger transfers, it'll rev out a little more. I don't know how much more power it's going to make, but it'll have a few more RPMs on top. And to get heat out of the motor, I'm going to remove most of this baffle I can get in here, take that right out of there, and instead of having the exhaust gases get deflected down into here and then radiate to the cases, which adds heat to the cases, it's going to go over the top of the baffle, and I'm just going to cut a hole, let it go straight out there. Now, I was listening to one of the guys talking about muffler mods, and it's kind of a random thing in their mind. Oh, does it make noise or power and stuff like that? And one of the saws that I believe I saw was one of the homeowners' base saws. With a lot of those saws, the Strato saws in particular, they have very, very short blowdowns. A big hole in the muffler really matters and can really help. On some of the other saws with different port timing and different characteristics, just a wide open hole may or may not give you the same kind of results, probably won't. And I guess the message I'd like to send to the people who watch that is it's not a one solution fits all, okay? The way the engine is designed is either going to want some restriction or no restriction or somewhere in between based on things like the case volume transfers and stuff like that, and take volume, because you got to think about the system from the filter through the carburetor, all the intake plumbing, the case volume, RPMs, the length of the transfers, volume of the transfers, all the way out the exhaust. And it's basically trying to come up with a balance of all those things which really give you a better performing saw. And the weakest link in that chain of events usually is going to be things like primary compression in the transfers, and then the carburetor has to be big enough to feed it at the RPMs you want to run, obviously. And the exhaust, its scavenging characteristics can either help or hurt depending on the rest of the saw. It's not like you just open up a saw, you know, put a big old T-bone in front and expect everything to work beautifully upstream of that. It may happen, it does in some, but it's not a guarantee is my point. And I think it looks like it's been running good. The person who's been running has been using a good oil. One of the things I also notice is when I open up the saw like this, if I have a nice oil film in there, that makes me happy. That means the person who operates the saw is putting enough oil in the mix and using the right kinds of oil. It's not unusual for me to crack a saw like this and see a wax film in there. And one brand in particular was selling that as their premier pro level oil. And every one I cracked open, you had that waxy layer in there. I thought that was kind of interesting and funny. Obviously didn't hurt them because they were reliable saws. But a lot of people ask why I use brass, you know, versus stick weld. Well, I got a MIG welder. I can do that too, I suppose. But brass is one of those like really vibration resistant type bonds. It's pretty easy to accomplish. I have yet to have I've yet to have one of these fail due to vibration or anything like that. And I would say the roots of the brass are back when I used to do motorcycles. What would happen is you crush a expansion chamber or crack one, and if you welded it, you know, a lot of people would want to weld them up. What would happen is right next to the weld you get another crack because of the intense vibrations you're getting from an expansion chamber. It's all about vibrations, you know. I'd use brass and it was ugly as sin, but it'd get me through a race. If you look at the opening there, the lower transfers to this. And I'm debating, do I actually change these caps? You know? Now I need to remove about 10 thousandths off this flange. This one's not hitting, but there is absolutely no clearance, right? If I put my gasket in there, obviously being stock, there's no problem. And if I put my 10 thousandths gasket in there, you can see the gap now. And that gap is roughly the thickness of that gasket. Surprise, surprise. If you look in the back, is I rotate, I'm holding it from the front, but if you look right back there, there's about 10 thousandths where it actually has hit the the top of the case, and that's where 90% of the clearance issues are. Boy, I don't know if you can see it. About 10 thousandths right there, because that's, I don't have good lighting. That hit here, and it's holding that up. And that's like 90% of the problems guys have with these stupid things. They try to modify them. You know, they chase these nuts and stuff, the clearance over here, and yeah, they interfere some maybe, but the biggest problem is this flange right here hitting the case. So I try to take off about 10-15 thousandths. I put a little marker there so I wouldn't go too far. And measured before, it was about 510 thousandths. So I want to get down a little bit there. So now it's 490. $495, close enough. That's quite a bit more. So I just took the belt sander and took that down, I guess 15 thousandths, which is fine. So now I'll break all the edges, and you know, then we'll start. Let me smooth out these, and then we'll start cleaning up this cylinder and putting it back on. Got to clean it out really good. I haven't decided on the caps yet. Transfers are about what RPMs it wants to run. Now I've pumped up the compression quite a bit, and I don't know. There's a part of me that wants to let it come up a few RPMs and get some more power that way, and there's a part of me that says, you know, combination of having the open bearings because of the non-stuffer, which really lets the mixture get down into the bearings a little bit easier, plus a little bit lower RPM, means this man's work saw is going to last a little bit longer. But then there's a pride part of me that says, man, I want to make this thing sing, so let's spin. But I'll decide before I put it together, and I'll let you know after I'm done. So basically on this, I did the standard remove out the material in front of the exhaust port. And you got to remember it's coming at an angle, so you got to kind of reach down in there and get more of the baffle. And did my normal cut the flange down and kind of smooth the entry to the lower transfers. This cylinder here came off a crush job. The saw had broken cases, and it got run over by a skidder. It was actually a saw that I had fixed for other reasons. Didn't do the mods. It's not a modded saw. It's just a stock saw.